Hello, everyone. My name is Xunjing Wu. As one of the MOSA events in the fall, I'm going to be talking to 3 MCIT students who did internships this year. The talk will have 2 parts. The first part will be with Angela Patini, who interned at Atlassian this summer as a software engineer intern, and with Maggie Molen, who interned at this very cool startup in South Africa, actually, as a product manager intern. So that's the first part. The second part is more like a follow-up with Angela Wen. She actually did a very comprehensive and informative webinar last year about how to apply for internships, as well as how to prepare for those technical interviews. So if you missed that talk, feel free to check out the link below for the webinar last year. So now she's actually interned at Lyft and GitHub as software engineer interns. I'm going to be asking her to share her experiences working at both companies.
So Angela and Maggie, tell us a bit more about your experience before you started MCIT or before your internship. Any coding experience you had before, any CS courses you took before?
Yeah, so I can start. So before MCIT, I didn't have any coding or computer science experience. I went to Penn for undergrad and I majored in philosophy, politics, and economics, which is kind of a slightly unique major at Penn, but it's one major. So very humanities based. And then after graduating undergrad, I worked for a couple of years in product management for a non-tech company. It was basically for a jewelry company, among other things that they sold. And I decided to get the MCIT degree because I wanted to go into technical product management. So yeah, no CS coding experience. And I hadn't done, so I was applying to product management internships. So I hadn't had and still haven't had internships that have been very coding heavy. But I do think it's valuable, learning those skills in this program, but I haven't applied them to my internships really.
I didn't have much coding experience before I started. I also did my undergrad at Penn. I studied mathematics and I took one coding course while I was at Penn. So I would call that slightly helpful, but still not too much.
Awesome. So congrats, but you both got really valuable internship experience. So tell us a bit more about, your internship. Where did you intern? What did you do? Stuff like that.
So I interned at a company called Plentify. So it's an energy startup based in Cape Town in South Africa. So I can't, they're in stealth mode right now with, they're basically launching a new product that is going to be their main new product. And until that launch happens, I can't discuss it in too much detail. But basically what they do is they're focused on like building smart devices that help maintain the health of the energy system in South Africa and ideally outside of South Africa once they expand. The grid in South Africa has a lot of problems. They have something called load shedding, where basically to manage peak demand on the electricity grid, they basically turn off everyone's power, or they turn off people's power kind of in like chunks. So that neighborhood is turned off from 3 to 5, and that neighborhood is turned off from 5 to 6 to manage how intense the peak gets. And obviously that's incredibly annoying. So their products try to address problems like that and help make it so that the energy system is like more sustainable and more reliable for everyone. What I did for them, so I was a product management intern. Product management is very, very broad in the type of stuff you do. So my internship, parts of it veered more like product marketing, and parts of it feared being more technical. So probably my biggest project was working on the website to announce their new launch. Their old website isn't representative of what they do anymore. So I did a lot of journey mapping for that, which is kind of tracking customer journeys throughout the product process. And that involved doing a lot of customer interviews and client interviews to kind of learn about their experience and what is frustrating for them and what their pain points are. And I used that to develop the wireframes for the website, and then worked with a graphic designer and a copywriter to actually finalize the messaging that we had decided on. And other things I worked on were kind of creating like a bug prioritization board, and talking with engineers about what would be helpful there, and deciding what platform we should use for that, to manage the actual devices and the software and firmware involved in running them, basically. And then just a bunch of other small things, small projects here or there that have been cool. So yeah, it was a really valuable experience, and I got to work on pretty meaningful projects for an intern, which was really cool.
I interned with Atlassian. So they are a Sydney-based company that creates software products that promote teamwork. So that was really cool to be a part of. And I was a software engineering intern for them. And I was supposed to be a front-end intern. I got very lucky with the team I was on and had a lot of freedom. So when I went in, I had a sort of front-end type project. But as soon as I finished that, let me tell you about that first. So my team was in charge of creating Atlassian's new documentation website. So the old website wasn't built to have a lot of customers, and Atlassian has grown pretty fast recently. So they are rebuilding the documentation website. And I was in charge of the guides feature. So for their products, they want to have sort of user guides to help new people get started. And I built some progress bars and some things to make it clear that content authors and users were working with a guide. And after that finished, I was allowed to work on anything that the team was working on, which was very cool. I just felt like a member of the team. And halfway through the internship, I became particularly interested in the deployment pipelines. And my manager just let me work on those, figure out how they work. And while I was doing that, I found a lot of memory leaks in the tests that our team had created, and also noticed that it was weird in the deployment process. It was taking between 2 minutes and an hour for the code to run through all the tests. And so I started asking questions. That's when I found the memory leaks, and my manager let me work on fixing those. And by the end, they consistently took 1.5 minutes. So it was a very cool internship. I had a lot of freedom, and I loved my team.
That's awesome. When you mentioned memory leaks, it just reminded me of 593 and 595. It is what you learn useful, like from those two courses, that was useful for your internship, or it was a different thing?
Yes and no. It was useful to really understand the mechanics of memory leaks, but again, not. They were in a testing framework, so I didn't really use the same type of thought process to fix them.
Right. But it's good to hear that at least what you learned in the class, at least conceptually, helped you understand the internship problems. Great. So I guess really quickly, what tools and languages did you use for both of you in the engineering internship and the product management internship?
So because it was a product management internship, I wasn't directly like reading or writing code, like I wasn't reviewing code. That said, some product management internships or jobs, you might be more involved in that process, but at this company, that wasn't part of my job. But some of the tools I used Sketch for wireframing, which I think is a really great tool if you're wireframing. It's probably my favorite one to use. We used Asana for project management stuff. I think those are probably the most important ones beyond just like, Google Chat. They're like a kind of Google Suite company. So I use a lot of those products. But yeah, I think Sketch and Asana were the big ones for this internship.
I was very excited about the technologies that I was going to work with going into the internship. That was part of the reason I accepted the offer. So I got to work with React, JavaScript, TypeScript, Node, GraphQL, and in fixing all the memory leaks, I became very familiar with Jest testing, which is a JavaScript testing framework. So a lot of front-end things.
Awesome. So it looks like you both learned a lot. So what would you say is the most valuable thing you learned from this internship? Could be technical, could be non-technical.
That's a hard question to answer just because like I did so many different things that it's hard to pick just one. I think something that was cool for me to see is how the website development process looks from like different points of view. So like how a copywriter thinks about it, how the graphic designer thinks about it, how like the ultimate like developer thinks about it, and how all of those pieces need to come together. And as a product manager, that's like one of I think the most interesting parts of the job for me is kind of working with like people in very different jobs. So like creative artsy people versus, technical developers, and helping them communicate with each other to make a product that is as good as it can be.
I agree. This is a very hard question. I learned a lot of great things with Atlassian, but I think my favorite one was it really does matter if you take initiative. So the first half of my internship, it was great. I learned a lot, but the project, and again, you may not have a lot of freedom where you intern. I was given a project for the first half of my internship, but as soon as I finished that and I was allowed to interact with the whole code base, the second half of my internship, I just learned so much more. I was really engaged and asked a million questions and really wanted to work on the things I was bringing to my manager. So when I came to him and I was like, can I work on the deployment pipelines and can I fix these memory leaks? I think it was really exciting for everyone around me as well because they were excited that I was excited. So take initiative, ask a million questions, know what you want to be working on.
Totally.
Yeah, and I want to piggyback on that, saying that I think that sometimes you think that you have an internship that is too structured to ask, but most good managers will not care if you ask. They might say no, but they'll be happy that you asked to do something different. And good managers, I think, will try to at least accommodate you somewhat, to give you something or have you sit in on a meeting or something. So yeah, I think in terms of like building your career, it's really important to like know what you want to do and like Angela said, like actively pursue those opportunities and internships and jobs.
Yeah, I totally agree. So was your goal to get a full-time offer for the company? Did that happen? Do you plan to accept?
I definitely wouldn't say that was a goal. It's complicated for me by the fact that they're based in South Africa, which would be really, really cool, but also like a total life change to move over there. I actually am still interning with them part-time. So I worked that out with them because I really liked working with them and didn't want to leave my projects. Basically, I wanted to keep going, and they were really excited to like work that out with me. And I think from there on, we'll see what happens, whether it makes sense to continue full time or whether I'll ultimately apply for other stuff.
I would say it wasn't initially it was a goal in the sense that I wanted a job, but as the internship went on, it became my goal because I really just fell in love with Atlassian and that's where I want to be. So I don't know if I have a return offer yet. I'll know in the next few weeks and I will definitely accept. Don't tell them.
Okay, I won't. Great. So a lot of students are really interested in learning more about the application process. It sounds like both of you got really cool internship opportunities. So how did you get there? Can you tell us a bit more about how the application process looked like when you apply?
Yeah, I will say that I think my experience is like a little bit unique in that I kind of found Plentify pretty early in my application process, so I didn't apply to as many companies as I otherwise would have. But I think I started applying, I think it was probably January, February, because I accepted the offer in February, and then a few weeks after that, COVID happened and it changed everything. Because initially the offer was like come to South Africa for 12 weeks, which would have been cool. And then I remember having to work that out. So yeah, I think I started applying places January, February, which is maybe too late for some people depending on which companies you want to work at. So I specifically wanted to work at startups and specifically wanted to work for a startup with some type of like social good component. Just because like my previous, like my pre-MCIT background had been in like political stuff, and I kind of wanted something to tie those things together. I guess like two passions, if you think about it that way. So I was looking for a very specific type of company and very specific type of internship. But I want to give this with a caveat to the people who are interested in working at like bigger companies like Amazon and Facebook. I think a lot of those like product management internship processes happen earlier. Sometimes you can also get hired later in the spring, but I think a lot of times it happens in the fall. So just want to give that caveat that like when you should start applying depends very much on what types of companies you want to work for. But I do think if you want to work for startups and other smaller or medium-sized companies, a lot of times they start looking for interns a little bit later, just because they don't have such an established like internship pipeline, if that makes sense. So they don't have like a very specific process, and they hire for interns for the projects that they need more immediately. So they don't know which type of interns they're going to need in October. They don't know until like a few months before the internship is going to start. But yeah, I don't really know how many companies I applied for. I didn't keep track of it, but I probably applied for like a handful, like five to 10, and then I heard from Plentify. So I was applying primarily on Handshake, which I think is a really great resource for people to use. I think it helps you, first of all, it helps you find cool companies that you wouldn't otherwise know about, like companies that want to hire Penn grads will post their stuff on Handshake, and I wouldn't have known about Plentify if I hadn't seen it on Handshake. And I think it's easier to get through like the resume screen on something like Handshake than it is on like an open platform like LinkedIn or something, just because there are so many people applying. And I think that a lot of times people are paying more attention to their job listings on sites like Handshake. So yeah, I think Plentify was like one of the first companies I interviewed with, and I just liked them so much that I accepted the offer. I can get into the interview process now, or I can, Angela, if you want to answer, and then we can get back to that, whatever you guys think makes more sense.
I can answer, and then we can talk about the interview processes.
Yeah, sounds great.
Okay, so I applied for a lot of companies. I'm gonna say more than 80, but I don't have a really good estimate. I started applying in September, and I don't think so I agree with Maggie on it's probably best to start applying early if you're interested in specific companies. but my main advice would be know which companies you want and make sure you know their timelines. So I started in September and I applied to a lot of the companies or a lot of the bigger companies, but my application for Atlassian went out the first week of January and I found out in February. So, and they turned out to be the exact company I would want to be with. So know which companies you want, know their timelines. Don't be too stressed if it's December and you don't have an internship yet. I didn't find out till February. I didn't apply for them till January. I mean, I was extremely stressed, so maybe be stressed. But still, there are a million companies still looking in the spring. So I started in September, went all the way to February, and yeah.
Great. So how was the interview process look like for you guys?
So for me, it was all, even pre-COVID, it was all virtual just because I'm in the US and they were in South Africa. So I think I got through the resume screen and they emailed me and said, let's set up a Zoom call interview. So I interviewed with Kalis, who is kind of one of the co-founders, but he's like more business oriented. He runs the business development team. So part of the interview was figuring out exactly what I would want to work on and where I would be best suited to work in the company. So I could have potentially been reporting to Kalis, working on like more business development projects. So that interview was like definitely go into an interview knowing like where you want to work, because they asked me a lot of questions like that, like what I wanted to do, where I thought my strengths were, things like that. And then I think there was like I wouldn't say it was a technical interview. It was maybe like closer to like a consulting case interview. And not a super intense one, like not like one of the like McKinsey Bain ones that you would get, but something like that. So the last, I think 15-20 minutes of my interview was a case question. And then after that, they told me I moved on to the next round, and they had me schedule another Zoom interview with John, who ultimately was my boss. He was the Plentify founder and CEO. And so he runs all of the product team, which I think can be pretty common at startup. Often like the product team is like the CEO or the founder, just because it touches on a lot of different parts of the business. It's hard to like assign it to like just the business team or just the engineering team. And I talked to him, and the interview format was pretty similar, kind of like starting with behavioral and then moving into like another case question. And I think I heard back from them pretty soon. I think in the interview, I think John might have kind of like not given me the offer, but said something like feel hopeful, basically, which was nice, because I hate when they make you stress on purpose. And then I think I heard back with a firm offer, like maybe a week later. And then COVID happened, so everything kind of changed, and there were a few weeks of not quite knowing what was going to happen and not knowing if it was going to be in person or if we were going to have to go remote. So that was kind of a stressful post-offer experience, but it all ended up working out.
So my interview process, I would say it was very typical. So it started with a 90-minute coding assessment, and quickly after that, I was on the phone with someone from HR, short behavioral interview. Then I had a technical interview with just some random person at the company, which I'll tell you more about later. It was interesting. And then the last round was an hour and a half. I had another technical type interview, but I had to talk through one of my past projects, and then they would ask me questions on it. So I used the final project from 594, so that turned out to be very useful for me. And then I had the second half of that interview was 45 minutes with the person who ended up to being my manager's manager. And he was really wonderful, and it was behavioral and just a good conversation. So it was the best interview process that I've been through. It's just every step, I loved the people I was talking to more and more. It just became so apparent that they lived their company's values. So Atlassian's very strong on promoting their values and making sure they're hiring people who live the values. So it was just really refreshing to see that everyone, even in the interview process, was living the values.
That's cool. So for Angela, would you say like the 3 rounds, a mix of technical and behavioral questions, would you say that process is pretty typical for, other software engineering internship interviews you went?
Yeah, so I mean, all of the technical and behavioral, yes. I didn't have another interview where I had to describe or talk about past, or really just had a 45-minute breakdown. This was my project, but I also didn't have many other final round interviews, so I don't know if that's typical.
So did you guys use referrals when you were applying? Was it helpful?
No, I didn't use referrals, but I would definitely recommend it. I think it helps. That's often harder to do with like smaller companies and startups just because you're much less likely to know someone who's worked there. But I've been like pleasantly surprised by how often people post like in our Slack channel, like the MCIT Slack channel, saying, hey, like I just got a job here. If anyone wants a referral, ask me. So I think especially if you're applying to a lot of the big companies, a lot of people in the program, especially, like people who are further along in the program are definitely willing to help you and guide you through the process in whatever way they can.
So I have a strong opinion on referrals. I did use a referral for my Atlassian application and for several other applications. So applying September to December, it was very disheartening. And in December, I was like, I need to change everything up. I need to do things different because I need to hear back from people. And so on LinkedIn, I just started messaging people who went to Penn, just asking if they had 15 minutes to talk about their company and like how they liked working there as a software engineer. And a lot of people responded. I talked to a lot of people, and I didn't ask for referrals. My last question was, what's the best way to apply to your company? And if it was a good conversation, they most of the time said, I could give you a referral. So before I started doing this, I was kind of stressed. Like, you have to network and you have to know people to get a job. But after doing this, a lot of people are nice. A lot of people want to help other people get to where they are. And especially if you look for people who went to Penn students love to help Penn students. So put that in your message. Don't ask for anything. Just say, do you have 15 minutes to talk about your experiences? And it was also helpful for another reason. It became research. The companies that I really wanted tended to be the ones where people responded to me and had really good things to say about their company. So if you go with a lot of questions, don't go with the intent of, I need a referral. Go with the intent of, do I want to work for this company? And you can get a lot from a 15-minute phone call and maybe get a referral. And I found it to be very helpful. So you don't really have to know anyone. Just try to do your research into the company.
That's great advice. So for your resume, did you put your GPA? Do you think that was important? What about pass and fail, since we do have that option right now? And did you put any side projects on your resume? Do you think that was helpful as well?
So yeah, my GPA was on my resume. I think that like I think this probably applies to both of us, that we were applying pre-pass fail before that was an option. So I don't really have much to say about that beyond I think that most companies either don't ask for transcripts and so would never know, or I think would be understanding given the circumstances. I think bigger companies are, again, more likely to ask for transcripts. Like I think Google might ask for them. So know the companies you're applying for with that. But I wouldn't be too stressed about that. But yeah, I did put my GPA in my resume. I don't know. Probably it helps with a resume screen, I think. But after that, it never came up in the interviews. So it's something that I think if you have a strong GPA, you might as well put it on your resume. But I don't think it's make or break. And I think it's something that you could definitely work around if, maybe you had a bad class or something. Oh, and side projects. No, I didn't have any side projects on my resume, mostly because, again, like I was applying to product management internships, which is very different in terms of side projects. I think that's a much more common thing when you're applying for development and engineering roles. But I definitely don't think they hurt. And if I had interesting product management related projects, I probably would put them on my resume. I think it's less of a focus with product management internships and jobs in general.
I did put my GPA on my resume. I pretty much have the same advice as Maggie. Just, if it's good, it can't hurt you and might help you with resume screening, but I can't imagine it would be too hurtful if you have all of these skills and come from this program if you don't include it. So yeah, that's my best advice for that. For pass fail, I have thought about this a lot. I think I don't see a way it could really hurt you. So I've been thinking about this because I'm currently applying for jobs and deciding whether to take my last 2 classes pass fail. And if during my internship interview process, I did have classes listed on my resume, but no one ever asked me my grades. Most places are not going to ask you for your transcripts. Maybe one will, and I think you have a pretty good reason to say these were pass fail. I would say don't do too many pass fail in the sense of have a GPA, but otherwise, I don't think it can hurt you. And side projects, I would say for software engineering, I thought they were helpful, but only in the sense of building up skills. So in choosing my side projects, I really chose them based off of what skills do I want to learn, because MCIT is really good with Java, C++, a lot of back-end type things. I decided to do some front-end projects, get JavaScript, React, all of these buzzwords on my resume. And I think the most important part of side projects is showing someone that you're really passionate about what you do. So it's a really good way to show you're excited about coding, but I think the most important part of the whole process is just being excited about coding. And if you don't have time for side projects, but you are excited about this program, just let your excitement shine through. And I think that's all people are really looking for.
Yeah, I totally agree. So for preparing for the interviews, how did you go about it? What are the resources you would recommend for students who want to prepare for those type of interviews as well?
I think there are a lot of good books out there. I think this applies to both PM interviews and coding interviews. I read like Cracking the PM Interview, which is like one of the pretty highly recommended books. There's another one that's really popular and I can't remember what it's called now, but if you Google them, I'm sure you'll be able to find it. And I know there are similar books for like coding interviews and technical interviews. Like I think Cracking the Coding Interview is like written by the same people, or at least the same company, which I've never read, but I think that's one that is used a lot for like more technical software engineering roles. So yeah, like going through those resources, I ended up, like I said, like not having a technical interview, but I didn't know that going in. You don't always know what the interview is going to look like until you get there with some companies. So yeah, I'd recommend preparing in that way and just knowing what types of interviews are common for the roles you're applying for. So like I need to prepare differently for a PM technical interview than I would for a coding technical interview. They're going to ask you different questions and expect different skills. So it's important to at least know that on a higher level, even if you don't always know for the specific company. Again, that's especially true if it is a smaller company where there might not be as much like publicly available information about what the interview process looks like. But definitely if you're applying for bigger companies, like look into that. Like you can probably find what Google's interview process looks like, or Amazon or Facebook.
So I pretty much used the things you've heard about, cracking the coding interview. I started going through that. I ended up using Leap Code more, so I would go through a couple problems every day. I became kind of obsessed with it. I wouldn't recommend becoming obsessed with it, but cracking the coding interview was useful whenever I felt like I needed more information about a specific topic, but I found Leap Code problems help prepare me more for interview type questions. And those were the two main things. Well, those were the only things I used. 594 and 596, if you can take them before you start applying, I would recommend it. And that's why I didn't feel like I needed cracking the coding interview that much, because I felt they really prepared me for a lot of things that are covered in that book. But the other thing that was useful, so you won't always know what an interview is going to look like. When I would talk to people on LinkedIn on the phone, I would always ask, what was the interview process like for you? And they pretty always told me. So it's another really good way to get information, not just a referral. Like, it's a good way to prepare.
That's very true. So looking back, is there anything that you would have definitely done or not done in the interview process?
I can't really think of something specific. I think something I'm glad I did was telling them exactly what I wanted out of an internship. So like I said, like they were kind of open to they were during the interview, they were open to like deciding where they wanted to place you. So I was very vocal about like really wanting to work in product management and be involved with the engineering teams and not just on the business side. And so that ultimately like meant that my role at the company looked closer to the way I wanted it to look. So because a lot of times they're planning what projects they want the interns to work on, I think it's really good to be transparent in the interview process about what you want to work on, so that they're giving you the role that is most appropriate or giving you the projects that are most appropriate. And I know that applied to other interns. I think there were something like 10 to 12 interns this summer, and a few other people come to mind that had similar interview processes and were just very open about what they wanted to do, and then they got to work on projects that they were really excited about.
So I think I've pretty much talked about all of the things I would definitely do during every interview process, internship or jobs. So looking for jobs right now, I'm doing all the same stuff with LinkedIn, but I guess it changed how I view the whole process. You really want to think about it as you're also interviewing the company. So I don't think I'm going to apply for jobs without talking to people from the company beforehand, hearing firsthand their experiences, asking them their least favorite part about the company, and yeah, trying to talk to people beforehand is what I will always do.
That's really helpful. So we're approaching the end of this interview and experience sharing. Any parting advice from both of you for people who are interested in applying for internships in the coming season?
Yeah, I think just relax a little bit. Focus on like Angela has said, like finding companies that are the right fit for you, and don't get discouraged by not hearing back from every company, because that's just the reality of life and this whole process. But yeah, I think if you focus on the companies that matter most to you, you're going to have the most success.
My advice, so I said I would talk more about my middle interview, my technical interview, that's going to be my parting advice. So before the interview, I felt really bad. I was just, I don't know, maybe I was sick, but I still went through with the interview. I took a 15-minute nap right before it, which I decided to do because I thought that would be better than not taking the nap, which says something. And I woke up 5 minutes, sat up, and took the interview. And halfway through the interview, I was like, this is horrible. I am failing this. This is just embarrassing. I wanted to say, look, we both know this is not going well. Can I just stop and save us the trouble? And I didn't do that. I finished the interview. And then the next day I emailed them saying, I'm really passionate about your company, and I was feeling very sick beforehand yesterday. Is there any way I could redo it? And they responded, we thought you did great, and you're going on to the next round, so no need to redo. So my advice is, no matter how bad you think you've done, you don't know how other people have done, you don't know how hard the questions are, and you really don't know anything. Just try your best. Do not stop in the middle now, no matter how embarrassed you are, and no matter how bad you want to stop. I thought I failed, and it was the company I got. So just keep going, stay positive.
Yeah, I actually had a similar experience like Angela. Actually was my last round, and I thought I didn't do so well, but I ended up getting the offer, and the interview from the last round also emailed me to congratulate me when I got the offer. So yeah, don't lose hope, and stick to your goal and try your best. Yeah, great. So this is excellent. Thank you, Angela and Maggie, for sharing your experience. I really concur with a lot of things you said. So thank you again for taking the time.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Angela, tell us about your internship experience. I know you interned at 2 places, actually.
Yeah, so this year I started off interning at Lyft. I was there from the end of January to the beginning of May. And I also did a summer internship at GitHub from June to August. I previously had a fall internship scheduled, but it was actually canceled in January, and I applied for a different one. And I'm interning at another company now called Cockroach Labs.
So, so what did you do as an intern at Lyft and GitHub?
So at Lyft, we were placed onto teams based off of our preferences and our manager preferences and our experience. I was placed onto a data infrastructure team, which was a team I was really excited about because I wanted to learn a little bit more about infrastructure and the kind of very back end of the stack. My team worked on batch compute. So if you've taken 595, you maybe learned about how certain data is put into a batch and then computed for efficiency. And I specifically worked on a big data tool called Apache Spark that some of you may have heard of. All the Apache products are open source. So many companies like Lyft at that scale, they're unable to use the open source product out of the box. And they have to make some modifications within the company to kind of customize it for their own personal use. And my project was to work on a proof of concept to modify part of upstream open source Spark for a Lyft use case so that we could run Spark on Kubernetes, which is a containerized application. There is some problem right now in that it's unable to do that because intermediate files are written to local disk. And when you're running in the cloud, you can't share local disk files. So I used some Amazon products like S3 in order to move the intermediate files over and back. And that's what I did at Lyft. It was a pretty, I think, non-standard project because most of the Lyft teams work on the actual Lyft mobile app that you probably use. They work in Python, and it's more of a traditional full stack experience. My team was very back-end, and my project was very research heavy. It's something that it's been done before, but hasn't been publicized. So we knew that theoretically it was possible, but we didn't know exactly how. And it was a problem I was excited about, but it was also very slow to ramp up and to learn a little bit about that problem space. I also got to collaborate with people from other companies, like even Uber and Palantir and LinkedIn, which was really exciting because we were all working on the same problem, right? Which was fixing Apache Spark for our own use cases. And I found that pretty exciting. I felt like I was kind of pushing a part of the industry forward in a way that could be used across companies and wasn't just for Lyft's purposes. At GitHub, I had previously interviewed for a different role, but that project was canceled. So I was given the choice to pick another product before I joined. I ended up picking the education product because I have experience in education. It's where my background was before MCIT and even during my first few classes. This was a traditional full stack app in Ruby on Rails, and I didn't know anything about Ruby on Rails. I had stayed within the Java world, or at least the Java virtual machine, working with Scala at Lyft. But I had to learn Ruby on Rails at GitHub, and it was the first time I had really worked on a production level full stack web application. So that was pretty interesting. My project was data related again because I kind of chose what I wanted to do. I was allowed to set up observability and metrics on the GitHub Classroom product, which we use in, I think, 591 and 594 for our final projects. So that product actually started as an intern project many years ago, which is pretty cool. And it continued on and now has a full engineering team staffed to it, but it doesn't have some of the things that you would expect from full projects like observability. So we actually didn't know how many users were coming in or where users were dropping out and having issues and pain points. So I connected the product to an internal data tool that was a wrapper around another Apache product, Kafka, which is a streaming product. And we're able to publish metrics basically to our data warehouse now to say how many users made it to a certain point in our app and look at the differences between where users are not enjoying the experience so that we can improve their onboarding process. My team at GitHub was working on an experiment around onboarding, so I felt a little bit integrated into the team there. My work kind of directly converged with the rest of the teams, and we were able to start the experiment at the end of my internship.
That sounds really cool. You mentioned quite a few languages that you used on both internships, but as far as I know, these languages are so far not covered in MCIT. So did you have to, did you already know these languages before you started, or did you have to pick them up pretty quickly?
So luckily with Lyft, I was put into a Java team, and I probably maybe was put into that team because it's one of the only teams at Lyft that uses Java, and I had written that it was my strongest language. It's one of the only teams because a lot of the data products are in Java. So I worked in Java, and then some of the product is in Scala as well, which also works off the Java virtual machine, but is functional. And I think it's actually pretty difficult for me to learn. I don't think I ever really got proficient in it because I didn't spend a lot of time doing a formal course in it. I was just kind of messing around until I got it to work. It wasn't really the purpose of my project, and I was able to get by with enough Java that I learned in 591 and 594. At GitHub, I was pretty concerned about learning Rails. I had learned some other web framework before, maybe 2 years before, but forgotten most of how it worked. This is interesting. I messaged the Penn undergrad student who teaches the Rails class to undergrad. It's like a 1 credit class. He actually was one of our TAs in 595, and I knew him at the time from that class. And he was happily available to send me his Rails PowerPoint slides that he had made for the Penn undergrads, and even set up a meeting to walk me through. So I had a little bit of an introduction from him, but I still felt like pretty unprepared. I also got lucky because I joined at the same time a ton of Microsoft engineers integrated into GitHub, and they came from C# backgrounds, which are more C-style Java languages. And the company had arranged for Ruby on Rails workshops for them. So I was able to join a few of those, and I felt like it really ramped me up very quickly, and I was able to get to a okay level, and then my team carried me through the rest, and I feel pretty proficient in it now after a little over 2 months. but now in my fall internship, I'll be working in Go, and I feel pretty excited about like learning a new language. I think it's very similar to C and Java, which I've now learned from the core courses. And I feel like at this point, after learning so many languages in between, I'm more confident just jumping into a new language and learning about the differences and using it appropriately.
That's really awesome. It's awesome to hear what you learned in class is directly transferable to what you do at internships, and also it gives you the ability to pick up new languages pretty quickly. So that's really awesome. So looking back, what do you think are the most valuable things you learned from either internships?
I think I learned like a ton of things that I couldn't have imagined I would learn before. Technically, I think I've improved so much. Actually, I just was able to merge a PR to production in my first week at my fall internship, which I never would have been able to do in my last two internships. And part of it is that it was like a small issue that I was given, but part of it is that I felt a lot more confident and more able to contribute. I think I learned a lot about how to work with large scale production type work, which is just very different from what we do in class. In the beginning, I didn't really know how to use like CI/CD tools, build tools. I didn't really understand testing at a large scale. And I really got stuck on a lot of those issues when I first started. Like I didn't know how to set things up. I didn't know how to run the tests. I didn't know what commands to run or what even to ask to understand what commands there were. And I'm now able to at least ask the right questions. And I think that's something that's very important. I definitely feel more comfortable with full stack web development, which I think is useful even if I end up in a different field. I think that's a generally applicable skill that is great for me. And then I think outside of technical work, I've gained a lot of confidence in just working in these projects and overcome a lot of the, not all, but quite a lot of the imposter syndrome that we're all facing as career changers and people who are new to this field. I think I also learned a little bit about what types of companies I want to work in and what kind of culture technically that I do better in.
That's awesome. So it's really cool that you interned, at both Lyft and GitHub. Are there any, similarities or differences you felt when you intern, when you worked there as an intern?
Yeah, a lot, but I do want to say that my experience doesn't necessarily correlate to the whole of Lyft or the whole of GitHub. In particular, at Lyft, I was on a pretty unique team that doesn't really reflect the way that most of the teams outside of data worked. But at Lyft, my project and my experience was very shaped by that team. So, for example, I was working really far back in the stack on a project that would take months, and after I left, the team picked up the project and it's going to take like several, maybe a year to really accomplish. So our timelines were just massive and we didn't really have this continuous release cycle that a lot of other teams at Lyft do have. I would also say the culture I felt was similar in that both are startups, both tend to be pretty young and are pretty proud about their startup kind of cool young culture. But I think that GitHub is remote first. It's always been remote first prior to COVID, and that really shaped my experience there in a positive way. I think Lyft tended to be very office based, and the transition in March when we moved to remote was a little bit difficult on the company because people were used to collaborating in person and there wasn't so much communication via Slack. There weren't a lot of decisions that had been written down, whereas many of them, I think everything was written down in GitHub because that's how they had always operated. I will say that GitHub is becoming more Microsoft-y. When I was there, the company size doubled because of Microsoft hires or people moving in from Microsoft. So I don't know how that's going to change in the near future. And another thing that I think shaped my experience a lot is the mentorship I had. My mentor at Lyft left the company my first few weeks there. And I essentially didn't have, I had a new mentor assigned to me, but he didn't have domain experience in my project. And so we were kind of figuring things out together. And that's why I ended up reaching out to people outside the company for help. Whereas everyone on my team at GitHub knew Rails, and they kind of probably could have done the project I was doing in a very, much more quickly than I could have, but they were all able to help me. And I felt like I moved a lot more quickly there with the mentorship and pair programming culture. So we were able to pair program and screen share almost daily, which I felt like really accelerated my learning.
That's really cool. As an intern, what was your goal for the internship? Was your goal to get a full-time offer from the company? Did that happen? Do you plan to accept?
I guess my primary goal was to learn from both of the companies, but I was hoping to get full-time offers of just so I could become employed at some point in the future. And it did happen. I'm very grateful to have received offers from both companies, especially considering the current economic environment. I do want to share that due to the nature of my project and my team at Lyft, I was asked to re-interview before receiving a full-time offer. And I was told that my performance reviews had been positive, but a separate hiring committee looked through all of our contributions technically that we had done over the course of the internship. And due to the nature of my project, it was like very research heavy and not a lot of production code and a proof of concept, right? So it wasn't really production ready for Lyft. They felt that they weren't able to assess my technical abilities appropriately and asked me to do another interview. And I don't think that it was really a positive experience, but I did pass the interview and got the return offer. So I just wanted to mention that that may be the case. I have another friend at Intuit who was on an infrastructure team who had to do the same thing. So it may be something to consider if you end up on a team that's further from products. So yeah, it happened, and I do plan to accept one of the offers. I'm still considering which one, but I will say that when I applied to MCIT, I had written that GitHub was my dream company to work at, and I'm really excited that it's now possibly and very possibly an option for me, and I'm no longer interviewing with other places.
Congratulations. Really happy for you. That's awesome. So last question, you mentioned in the beginning of this chat that your fall internship got canceled in the beginning of this year, but now you're interning at another company. So how did you go about, looking for a fall internship in the midst of a pandemic, essentially?
Yeah, so my internship, I got a call in early January, so this is pre-COVID, from a recruiter where I was going to intern this fall. And she told me that they were canceling the fall cohort because they're planning on restructuring the program and the internship process. And I had been the only person to sign up prior to that moment, so they didn't feel too bad canceling just my internship. They were able to offer me an internship for 2021 and agreed to skip me forward in the full-time process, to skip some interviews if I wanted to. So that was kind of them, but I didn't know if I still wanted to intern in the fall. And at the same time, I wasn't sure how many companies were still recruiting in the spring. I know that companies such as Lyft had closed applications all at the same time. They had recruited for spring, summer, and fall all together last fall. But I kept an eye out. It was pretty difficult. I think not many positions were still open. First of all, not many companies even have a fall class, but then maybe half of those recruited at the same time as they recruit for summer. So many had closed. I only applied to 3 companies that I found that were open. Maybe there were more, I didn't look too closely. One closed very soon after I applied. One was Google, which never opened or opened its applications, but then decided not to have a fall class. And then the last one is the startup that I'm working at now. So I decided it was a field I'm interested in. It's a database company, and they work in distributed systems as well. So I don't know that I really want to work at such a small, like fewer than 200 people company, but I thought it would be a great experience, and I applied and got it.
That's awesome. So yeah, these are all the questions. Thank you so much for sharing, Angela.
Thanks, Gigi.